Welcome to Exploring Reality Maybe, where we explore the intersection of science, medicine, and mysticism with experts. What if the most effective way to understand reality was through the lens of a microscope? Our guest today is a computational neuroscientist who went into the field to legitimize the spiritual aspects of science, arguing that our brains aren't just command centers, but the very engineering that shapes our perceived reality.
Today we're joined by Dr. Rowshanak Hashemiyoon. Known as the People's Neuroscientist and Gandalf of the Mind, Roshanak's academic path ranges from studying thalamocortical dynamics at Yale to researching deep brain stimulation in psychiatric patients. Today, she bridges the hard science of the brain with transformational concepts through her work with Access to the Path, helping people move beyond their concretized perception of reality to discover who they are without these preconceptions.
In this conversation, we dive into why our mental health is not, quote unquote, all in our heads, and how chronic stress is actually physically remodeling our brain's architecture. We explore the physiological sigh as a mechanical reset for the soul, the fascinating science of how two brains synchronize during the human interaction and connections, and whether the ego is a necessary navigator or a story machine that causes us to suffer. Finally, Roshanak explains why it's time to finally update our human operating system for a world on fire. Welcome, Roshanak. It's so nice to have you here. You've been called the people's neuroscientist and even the Gandalf of the mind. These are remarkable titles for someone with deep credentials in computational neuroscience. Can you share an early memory or experience that first drew you to wanting to understand the human mind and brain, and what eventually pulled you in beyond pure science towards the more spiritual, transformative work that you're doing today?
First of all, let me thank you so much for inviting me on this amazing podcast. I'm so happy to be here. Also, thank you for your unbelievable question and very gracious. I have to admit it's true. People are very kind and generous. I love the brain. And when I was a child, I had a specific draw to the concept of reality. So I love this show. And what became very interesting to me was that whatever we perceived, whatever we thought, everything that was our reality because it was processed by the brain. And I heard about this thing called the mind. And there's this black box connection between the brain and the mind. You would say to someone, I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. But you would never say, I'm going to give you a piece of my brain. That just makes no sense. It's kind of gross and scary. So I was really interested. I was very interested in this black box connection between the brain and the mind and how we perceive reality. What is the source of our perceived reality? Organically speaking, it's the brain. That's our engineering. But I've also always been, so I've been very scientifically inclined, even since I was a child, but I was also very spiritual. The veil was always thin for me between this world and what we might call source, etc. And I remember at one point, somebody gave me a very prominent magazine, and on the cover was this question about God. And I remember thinking, that this is so important and that people have this natural inclination towards what is greater than themselves, towards the source of it all, towards truth. And yet, back then, it's like 100 years ago, I felt and I'd experienced that even though people were very interested in what we might call God, they weren't so willing to bring that forth, to put it in conversation, to explore it in that conversation, in the public forum, which is, how we start to understand ourselves better. When we have that communication, that back and forth, we flesh things out and so on. And so at that time, I thought to myself, consciousness is the linchpin here, which is connected to the mind. And so I actually originally went into neuroscience to sort of legitimize God, as it were. It's crazy, right? To give people something tractable, an excuse, as it were, or something that they could hang their hat on, that they wouldn't have to be so reluctant to explore what is natural and what they wanted to. There was a resistance to them being in alignment with themselves and their questions. So I thought through science, I could make this more sort of tractable and bypass this socially driven reluctance that people had.
That's great. So let's try to trace then through your background and sort of we'll get to your current stuff. But earlier on, you studied thalamocortical dynamics at Yale. So that's a fancy way of saying you study how deep structures in the brain process information. So interestingly, then you went on to do this basic research where you were studying these pathways to evaluate the benefits of deep brain stimulation for psychiatric disorders. So I don't know if our listeners realize, but deep brain stimulation is actually literally putting electrodes into the brain to treat various psychiatric conditions like maybe
And
depression
neurological ones,
and
yeah.
neurological. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that work. What did you learn from it, and about the relationship between the physical brain, like you talked about before, and a person's inner experience?
This is a brilliant question, and one that people don't really think about too much. And working with neuropsychiatric patients and DBS really taught me a couple of important truths. The first is how profoundly we underestimate this mortal coil, this greatest feat of engineering known to humans. So our organic engineering, we sort of take it for granted, right? This is our physical vehicle. It shapes our perceptions. It houses our choices, our emotions. We barely acknowledge the influence that this body that is run by the central servo of the brain, we barely acknowledge it. To drive a car, you have to study and learn and practice. For a ship, a boat, same thing. For a rocket, I mean, nobody would dream or put anyone inside a rocket ship without some kind of understanding, training, study, something. And yet here we are with something that is even more powerful, more complex than the most complex thing we can think of, like, let's say, a rocket ship, a spaceship, as it were. And we just sort of think, we take it for granted, like it has no real gravitas in the equation, but it does. So one of the things that you can see with deep brain stimulation is, especially in like Parkinson's patients, you can see an immediate change in people. You see someone's entire physical and or emotional life shift because of electricity, because of a difference in a millimeter of brain tissue. If you're just a little bit off, for example, in the subthalamic nucleus, when you're doing this deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, you can induce real psychic side effects. The person can suddenly become hypersexual and go out gambling and things like this. So you can't maintain the illusion that we're just a mind floating inside this neutral container. I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I thought you wanted to say something.
No.
So that's the first thing, is that that this body is really, this vehicle that we have, that we've been gifted, is really powerful and really influential on our states of being. The second thing, and this was really revelatory for me, was the relationship to identity.
Mhm.
So patients who have Tourette's or obsessive compulsive disorder or depression or whatever, they spend their entire lives defining themselves in relation to their illness.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you have someone come out and they don't have a compulsion and obsession or just the tics. And I had patients say, because we have them keep a journal, and it helps them because they suddenly go, well, who am I now without this? This is who I've been my whole life. And I've wanted to get rid of this so bad so that I could have a more functional, better quality of life. But now I got to start all over again. I don't know who I am. And the treatment works beautifully, the therapy, the therapeutic modality. Then now you're left with the most important question of who am I? Who am I without the story? Who am I without the illness? Who am I absent all these identifiers and the ways that I've always thought of myself? And what's left of after that question, I think, is the real, that's when you really start to get into it. And the real, I might say challenge if I don't say struggle.
I love that perspective and conversation. And it reminds me of when people microdose, of course, their identity of self is disrupted. And I think it's actually what's attractive is that that old sort of concretized identity dissolves, destructs slightly enough, but then it comes back. But as you said, what happens if it's no longer there and you can't hold on to who you were? And so in a recent interview, a recent conversation you had a distinction between mental health and mental illness, which I think is really fascinating and important. And yet, in the broader conversation in society, the question is how is this conversation constructive in society? Like, extremes of emotion, anxiety, stress, all of those things. Does it make people more ill, more stressful to think about a mental health issue or a mental illness issue, and how is it defined?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say that, okay, look, it's really important that we discuss things that, like mental health or mental illness, that need to be destigmatized. And that is a wonderful accomplishment that we have because of the conversation. So I think this is really important.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's a difference between awareness and perseveration of getting stuck in this place. You see what I'm saying? So unfortunately, as we have these conversations around mental health, our mental health is getting worse, and we have documentation of that. And so this shining of a light on something that deserves attention, and then creating this sort of cultural reflex where every human difficulty is pathologized, this is not helping us at all, and it's making it worse. So every bad day isn't, oh my God, something's wrong with me, a symptom of what's wrong with me, and I've got to figure out what that is. We're allowed to grieve without thinking something's wrong with us. We're allowed to suffer. In fact, suffering is so normal. I think we've sort of lost this balance that is healthy. And so we've lost the idea of the health part of mental health in the conversation. And one of the things to remember is that the brain is a prediction machine, right? That's what it's all about. And even when you think about bias, we're all aware of bias, right? And thinking fast and slow, the brain works on algorithms. And if you're not going to be aware, again, as I said earlier, of how your brain body works, I mean, the brain's part of the body, obviously, but the whole kit and caboodle, if you're not fully present to how this organic engineering of yours is working, you might be fooled into falling into sort of meme narratives that would suggest that you are broken or not enough or incomplete or a failure or outside the norm. Everybody else is okay, but I'm not. You would pathologize something like suffering, whereas you could celebrate it as part of being human and articulating joy and all of that we do experience, the richness of our experiences as human beings, because that's what we want anyway. So there's sort of this strange paradox that the more we're focusing on mental health, the more we're staying connected to an untruth, a fragility of being, if you will, whereas we are quite robust. And I would say it's important to focus on something that's worthy of focus, but not to get lost in it and turn something that is meant to support health into a challenge to one's health. And therefore, where there is mental illness, a disorder of organic origin or otherwise, that can be treated through various therapeutic modalities, great. Where we have destigmatization, fantastic. But where we might then get lost and hurt ourselves rather than help or support ourselves, we need to be aware of that.
So let's see if we can maybe go beyond the brain a little bit. So before you just said you can put a wire in someone's brain and you can literally affect their emotions and you can affect
Yeah.
their whole state of being, which
Yeah.
sounds like, so we're just a brain with a body attached. And yet you've said your mental health is not all in your head,
No.
right? You've talked about how it's really all about a constant dialogue between the brain and the rest of the body, because of course the brain is connected to the rest of the body. So this sort of challenges, I think, the way people think about the brain. So walk us through this relationship, this brain-body relationship, and how the body is actually participating in what we experience.
That's an excellent question. Thank you. You guys are full of excellent questions. So this idea of, first of all, there is this place that people, even scientists, get stuck thinking that there is this brain and it's giving all the information down to the body and the body is just following the command center. Not true. Chronic stress, first and foremost, is very problematic. I mean, we have stress, but truthfully, at this point, we have chronic stress. And chronic stress is not just something that like I feel and I'm going to barrel through it, because it's causing real physical changes in your brain and your body. We know that inflammation is a result of chronic stress that at this point is being thought of as ground zero for basically all disease. So there's that. And when it comes to the brain, it actually causes palpable changes in the architecture of the brain. So when you experience chronic stress, for example, so there's something known as neurogenesis. That means we are creating our neurons, which are the brain cells. And in particular, the hippocampus, which is the center of our learning and our memory, when we are in chronic stress, then cortisol, our primary stress hormone, is released. And then that literally will change the shape of this hippocampus. How? Because, first of all, it's going to prevent neurogenesis. So the hippocampus will shrink. Secondly, neurons have these little branches at the end that are called dendrites. These dendrites literally will shrivel up. They shrink, they retract, and now you've literally changed the structure of the brain. And this is just one area. And of course, as you change this area, then you're going to change connections, right? The strength of connections between areas. But now another part of the brain that people love to talk about is the amygdala. And the amygdala is known as your threat detector and the center for fear. And the amygdala does the opposite. Now the amygdala, it's getting strong, it's getting bigger, right? So the dendritic trees in the amygdala will grow, which makes the amygdala now sort of much more reactive, I will say. It becomes hyper, sort of like you get this hair trigger alert. You have this hypervigilance that can occur. because you're always like feeling that something's going on. There's a threat. And so the fear comes from the potential presence of a threat. And so I think what's really important, I mean, this is amazing. You end up with a brain that is fearful, that is less rational. Oh, why is it less rational? Remember when I said that you also affect the connections between areas? So your executive functions, your prefrontal cortex, which is where you do your planning and your logic and rational thinking, etc. The connections between the prefrontal cortex and its influence on the amygdala decrease. And so now you have a less rational brain. You have a more fearful brain. You have a brain that is going to have difficulty with learning and adaptation. And it's going to be locked in basically to survival mode, which I think we all can relate to at this point. And that a reactive survival mode brain is us being reactive in survival mode. And how are we going to thrive if we're just really living in survival mode? So we really need to take this idea of stress in the brain body very seriously. Also, when I was talking about the brain being the command center, sending information down, there's this beautiful nerve called the vagus nerve you may have heard of. And the vagus nerve, that base of the word comes from also the base of the word vagabond. It's sort of meandering throughout your whole body. 80% of the information that the vagus nerve is sending is not coming down. It's not efferent. It's afferent, going up into the brain from the body.
Wow.
So, yeah. So you're getting a lot of information from the state of your body up to your brain, which is now obviously being just deformed, as it were. It's reformed. It's being altered. Your brain is being altered as a result of stress and this chronic stress. And we have environmental toxins that are stressing our body. We have financial stresses and wars and social media stresses that are stressing us. And so all of this uncertainty, you can start to understand, going back to your mental health question, Jody, how we are also in this really powerful mental health crisis. So we need to be even more aware of what's going on so that we are not falling deeper into that abyss where we're literally building brains that are wired for a world that keeps a threatening world that keeps confirming the threat.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no,
Our
it's
mind creates our
fascinating.
reality, right?
Sorry?
Our mind creates our reality.
Absolutely. But not in isolation, not in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's segue now to the concept of, I know, an area of interest of yours and mine as well, the concept of sort of the mystical. And you and I were both recently at a talk where the speaker, a practitioner, shared her experiences working with nonverbal children who this presenter believed could communicate with each other telepathically.
Right.
When I am confronted with a claim like that, my scientific brain automatically kicks in and I retreat to sort of thoughts of what kind of control conditions were there and, how repeatable were the findings and how rigorously were the measures used, all of the sort of scientific kind of things. What's your view about that kind of approach to this kind of finding that feels like it's somehow outside the realm and the domain of traditional science, and yet trying to inject, your traditional scientific viewpoint?
Well, if you might recall, I did ask a question.
I do recall. Yes.
The scientist in me came out and everybody went, oh!
Yeah.
And
I was there. I witnessed that.
That's right. That's right. And I had quite a few people come up to me afterwards and say, I had that question, or that was a question that really made sense to me and I really wanted an answer to that, and we didn't quite get a full answer to that. So I think one of the biggest problems is that we have this unfortunate duality that has been imposed upon us, this bimodal way of thinking, this either orness of it all. And we are so amazing. Our brains are so amazing. It has the capacity to hold both ands, contradictory thoughts, etc. And the fact we do ourselves a disservice when we think in this binary way of, is this mystical, magical? Is this scientific? And then, there's the scientific method, which is relatively new as the history of science and the world is concerned. And I'll give you an example of how this didn't serve us well. For example, nature versus nurture, right? Is it heredity or is it environment? How long did we live with that question until finally we realized, oh, well, it's both. And then the field of epigenetics showed itself, right?
Right.
A question that is well posed has a non-trivial bit of the answer embedded in it. An ill-posed question, on the other hand, can either be unsolvable or lead us down the wrong path. So it's very important the questions we ask, and that we then ask questions, as you were saying, David, like there are other questions that can go with questions. There's nothing wrong with questioning a scientist. It's funny, if you go into the world of the non-scientist, and if you were to ask questions the way we do and challenge the way we do, because we want to get to the truth.
Right.
And we do that through this conversation, as I was saying earlier on in this conversation. But other people, they feel like, oh, you're challenging them, or, there's something that is personal, as opposed to, no, I'm truly curious. I think that to an extent, we've sort of lost a bit of our curiosity and our willingness, therefore, to accept a bit of the magical and the mystical, which once upon a time coincided with science. So the scientific method as we know it today, for example, as I mentioned, is not the origin of human inquiry. That started a long time ago, and quite a lot of the science that we have and is the foundation of our scientific method, Western science, is grounded in the non-scientific method version that came from the East, which is the older civilization. And the word magic, for example, is connected to the Magi. These were Persian, this was from a Persian Zoroastrian priest scholars. So I think that when we think about magic and the mystical, we have to recognize that things like astronomy came from ancient Persia and these priest scholars, and mathematics, medicine. So much of what we have today comes from that, and creating false boundaries doesn't serve us at all. And by the way, we know that scientists have been silenced, even murdered, for stepping outside of what was accepted, not scientifically necessarily, but socially, or from the perspective of religion. When people came up and said, well, actually, the earth revolves around the sun, that did not go over so well, right?
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember
So
that.
you can't propose things like this. So what does that mean? That means that these scientific truths, or truths at all, science helps us find truth. It's not about science. It's about truth. It's about understanding. And so science is a tool. And it is unfortunately been tainted occasionally from social and institutional forces. So that can prevent us from getting to these truths that are ubiquitous. People are always asking, why am I here? Who am I? What is the world? What is the universe? Is there a God? What is consciousness? These are timeless, right? So when I hear a claim of something that isn't explained by the scientific method or hard science, as we call it, then I think, well, what other questions do we need to ask? I
Mm,
think, what are other possibilities we haven't explored? What are the limitations of the tools we have that will
mm,
help us get to the answers? Because we know that with technology, with microscopes, we saw things that we didn't think existed, for example. With technology, we are able to improve understanding, and that is supposed to be the purpose of technology as well as a tool.
it's so great. It's so great. Of course, we humans are limited in our ability to perceive the whole spectrum of reality.
Mm.
Certain species see things, hear things, feel things that we don't feel, taste, smell, touch, And
See,
so we've come up against our limitations, our edges, and technology is certainly helping us. I'm super fascinated by the intersection of neuroscience, quantum physics, and the study of consciousness itself, because it's turning everything on its ear about what reality may be, and this question of whether consciousness is the fundamental fabric or makeup of
mhm.
reality. And so I know that at the Florida Center for Complex Systems, you actually studied large scale brain dynamics. And I'm really fascinated by this because you essentially looked at how two brains synthesize when two people are in relationship with each other. And so this sounds a little bit like the string theory that two things seem separate can be connected from a distance, and this is exactly what science has now proven in a way. And I wonder, what did you find there? What does this research show, and what might it suggest about consciousness?
So that was great work. It was started by Scott Kelso, Dr. Scott Kelso, who also founded the Center for Complex Systems. Um, and what that work revealed was that there are social biomarkers that are measurable. So there's this phi signature that was found that presents itself when we are engaged in interpersonal interactions. So there's a clear pattern of activity in the brain that comes online when we are synchronizing, when we are syncing with each other, right? So the study involved two people being, not being able to see each other's hands and fingers, and being told to wiggle their fingers, and either to continue wiggling after the separator between them was removed and they could see each other's fingers or actions, behaviors, and were either told to do nothing um, or to synchronize. And what was really interesting is that even though they may have been told, like, go at your own rhythm, that people synchronize.
Mm.
Yeah. And that was some of the work that I did. Finding that was really interesting, and that there are also natural leaders and followers. But what's really interesting is that, let's take storytelling, for example, right? So as we share stories with each other, as we do as humans, Yuri Hassan's work showed that as a storyteller, when you're telling a story, the more engaged your listener is, the more the same areas of the brain that are lit up in the storyteller are lit up in the listener.
That's so cool.
Jody and I interviewed Yuri Hassan on
Oh
your
my God, he's
podcast.
amazing, right?
Yeah, he was great. He was really,
Yes.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yep,
And
yep.
people say, oh, this is a mirror neuron thing. No, they're whole parts of the
Amazing.
brain.
It's
And we
And
are,
amazing.
by the way, my brain right now is as lit up as your brain is, because I'm just loving this
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
same. And that's the thing, is what happens when those areas are lit up, right? That means we're experiencing things very similarly. So there's this idea that in Western culture, when you write something or when you explain something, the onus, the burden of understanding is on the speaker or writer. And so we do feature abstraction. We pull out pieces from the scene so that you'll be able to, it's like how computers do, right? You approximate at smaller and smaller angles until it looks like a smooth circle. And so let's say you go to the beach and you want me to experience what it was like when you're at the beach. You'll say, oh, it was really hot out, and my feet were burning in the sand, but there was this cool breeze, and there were children playing. You'll go through different features of the scene. That's the feature abstraction, until I can maybe feel and experience what you experience, because we want that as humans. That's in the connection, right? It gives value to our experiences. Also, connecting to what I'm going to say, I think, is the important point of all of this in a minute. In the East, it's more storytelling. It's more parables. And when you have a story, then the person can imagine themselves in that position. What if I were the hero or the heroine? What if I were the villain? What if I? And so you feel those things, and you can put yourself in that position. So the burden is on the reader or the listener to understand. So there are different ways to communicate, but the whole point is that to bring someone into your world. And so the boundary that we draw between us is not as strong as we think it is. And the brain, and you'll like this one, Jody, during meditation, for those who are real practitioners, there is a spatial reorganization in the brain that occurs that really starts to dissolve the boundary between self and environment, self and other. It's shown in fMRI studies, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And so we ourselves can think of ourselves as resonant systems, right? It's not so much that there's this I'm here and you are there. There's much more of a permeability between us.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So our brains change in the presence of each other's brains.
So good.
We are absolutely individual and profoundly important in our existence individually. Some people get really, they resist the idea of oneness and coming together because they don't want to get lost. They want to be special. They want to be seen for who they are. But the truth is that when you're in the collective, that's actually when you are more articulated as the individual, and that we need each other. We shape each other at the level of our neural architecture.
I love it. Wow.
Well,
I think this interview is really illustrating how diverse and multifaceted your research is, because your experience and your background. Because I want to now segue to another sort of concept that you've been involved with and interested in, and the notion of the physiological sigh. I actually heard Andrew Huberman talk about this on Bill Maher. And as I understand it, it's the idea of a double inhale. So an initial long inhale followed by a short one. But you tell us about the physiological sigh, what it is and why it's physiologically valuable, and what you found when you studied it.
So one of the things that I love about this question is it really highlights the importance of our physiology, our body, our mortal coil, as I said earlier. It really affects our state of being, and we tend to separate them out. The physiological. So whenever you seen a child when they're just like wailing and then they go, that's the physiological sigh. You take a deep breath in, a belly breath, you fill up your lungs, and then you take another real quick one to fill up the rest of that space, and then and what that does is it offloads CO2 and drops your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, right? So that double inhale, that full breath in, that fully inflates the alveoli, which are the little sacs in your lungs. And then you release that, you move from this sort of stressed state, this fight or flight state, into what is colloquially known as the rest and digest. Going back again, also to the vagus nerve. So you're dropping your hormones, that's physiological, right? many people, and I was one of them back in the day, thought something like when people go, oh, breathing and take a breath, and that's just woo-woo. No, there's physics and physiology involved in it. If you take a longer exhale than an inhale, you literally slow, and that's physics, you slow down your heart rate. When you slow down your heart rate, your vagus nerve will go back up and say, hey, we're okay down here. Because when is your heart rate fast? When you're stressed, when you're running, when you're fighting and flighting, right? And when does it slow down? When you're in rest and digest. So there's a real mechanic that is meaningful to our state of being when we honor what our body is here to do for us. And that's why it's important to understand what the body's doing so that you are in control of it instead of it being in control of you.
So can you practice it with our listeners, like for 2 or 3 breaths?
So the beauty of the physiological sigh is you can, in one cycle, really calm yourself down. You don't need more than, I would say, like 3. So did you want me to do like the 2-4, which is the longer exhale? Or you could do like a 4-7-8, or did you want me to do a physiological sigh, which
just a simple one that our listeners can practice when their heartbeat goes up.
I think that a very easy one to remember is 2-4.
Okay.
And it's called 2-4 because you take in, let's say, 2 seconds in and 4 seconds out, or you can take 4 seconds in, you double it, you take 8 seconds out. Your exhale is longer than your inhale. So you always breathe in through your nose because you get more oxygenation, not more oxygen, but more oxygenation when you breathe in through your nose. So you breathe in through your nose. And then
out of your mouth.
First lift helps to slow down the exhale and slow down that heart rate. So you will breathe in again for 4. Oh, and always start off with a quick, to exhale before you start your cycle, right? So
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
See? So your inhale will be half of your exhale.
Perfect.
2, 4, 4, 8, 5, 10, whatever works for you.
Perfect.
You can do that anywhere. But if you're like really distressed, like it's bad, and you've got like 2 seconds to take care of this, because you can do that multiple cycles, however long you need. But that physiological side, the benefit of that is when you're really in this, like, I got to get rid of this quickly. I got to come down fast. There you go.
There you go. Beautiful. So we always ask our guests about the ego. As someone who has literally studied the brain structure involved in self-deferential thinking, what is the ego from a neuroscientist perspective? And given your work in both science and spirituality, do you think the ego is something we need to transcend, manage, understand, let go of, dissolve, befriend? Where are we with that?
Big question. First response, my knee-jerk response is the ego is not the enemy. Because a lot of people are like, you got to get rid of your ego, right? No, so the ego is not the enemy. Nothing is, but we say so. And that sort of, circles back also to your question about mental health conversation. So the ego, from a neuroscience perspective, you could think of it in terms of the default mode network, because I think of the ego usually from a psychological perspective, but from the neuroscientific perspective, you think of it in terms of the default mode network, because the default mode network, which is quite a large network in the brain that comes online when you are in a non-task focused, typically, state. So you are resting, you're not falling asleep, you're present, but you're not focused on something. A great example of when your default mode network comes online could be when you shower. You know how we have great thoughts in the shower? It's because your default mode network is online. You don't have to really think about it.
Nice.
Right. So when your default mode network is online, one of the things that happens is you have this self-referential thinking. And you might remember the past, and rumination occurs in through the default mode network, and actually depression has also been sort of localized, although that's a whole nother story. Because depression, people think of it as one thing, but it's more like cancer, where it's a kaleidoscope. But there is an area in the prefrontal cortex where the default mode network is active, that we go into rumination. We start to create stories, this like machination of stories that come together as we're like, I call it time traveling. You travel into the past, now you're like all regretful and sad. You travel into the future. That's not, I'm not talking about the DMN specifically for that. With rumination, it's the past. But the time traveling, you go into the future and you are anxious or worried or nervous what's going to happen. So, so with respect to the ego and the idea of the self again, and there are areas of the brain and pathways in the brain that are important for the sense of self. And we need to have a sense of self. We need to have agency, it's called, right? But the default mode network can also be a story machine that can cause us to suffer. But the good thing about self-reference and agency is it allows us, and then we get into the idea of free will, but it allows us to navigate a social world. Remember, it's a lot more permeable than we thought it was, our relationships with each other.
Right.
So this continuity of identity, again, articulating the self across time is very important. You need to be able to distinguish yourself and protect your survival, right? So the ego here, if you want to call it that, I would call it agency or self-reference, as you were talking. It's very important to have that, because we do live in a world that we need to, be conscious in, if for no other reason than to survive.
Yes.
The spiritual aspect of this. So we go back to this paper that I was talking about that has the spatial topographical reorganization during meditation. When we think about ourselves and we think about, when do we feel really spiritual? Imagine when you're in a state of awe, right? What happens? That strong sense of self dissolves a bit and you become one with something much greater than yourself. You're like, wow. That awe. So from a spiritual perspective, the idea of the ego can be very limiting. It can create boundaries that would hold us back, that would prevent us from truths that we could understand and explore, that we are curious about.
Yeah, in a way, it can box us in,
Right.
or concretize reality in a certain way that doesn't allow us to see us as part of something greater,
Exactly.
or ourself without our limiting labels or idea of ourself. It's so beautiful.
Exactly.
And that just takes me into our last question, which is, this is your work with access to the past. Can you share with our listeners like what you do with I know you have some retreats, some teaching, some classes. How can our community learn about your work through access to the past, and what are you doing there?
So I do often list things on my Sociotap. So if you go to Sociotap, I think it's .com/access to the path, you'll see my different social media handles and some different things that I'm doing, some different things that I've done. I used to have a live show called Mindset, Heartset, Reset, which I put on hiatus for a month, and it's been a long time. I need to go back to it. But some amazing guests and fantastic episodes. I am on the board of advisors for Humanities Team, which is amazing. I'm also now on the board of advisors for the Haas Foundation, which connects health with art and science. I am working with Red Door Community, which was Gilda's Club. It's changed its name because no one should face cancer alone.
Mm.
I have my own events. I have one coming up that is called All For You, which you can find at allforyou.now. Um,
All
allforyou.now.
all of this will be on our website as well, on our show notes, all of the contact information.
I think the thing that has me really excited right now and that I'm really focusing on now, there are two things, and it's funny because they're both words. One is repatterning, that is connected to reforming, and the other is resistance.
Mm.
I used to have a program called Release Resistance to Success, which I'm firing up again. It was quite successful. I think that resistance is something that we don't think about much. We
Mm.
have quite a lot of resistance where it gets in our way.
Mm.
It keeps us from having the life that we are here to have, that we want to have, that we are free to create. Um, as Newton said, a body in motion stays in motion until it hits friction. Friction's resistance. Where do we have resistance points that we stop ourselves from a more expansive and beautiful, deeper life? On the other hand, we don't practice resistance where it's important and
Mm.
necessary. So I
Mm.
think resistance is something that I know resistance is something that I'm really focusing on. I'm going to start up some articles on Substack about that too. But the repatterning, and I think it's become kind of popular this year, people are focusing more on the nervous system, and good, because there are unconscious activities going on that before we even know it, and this goes back to what I was saying, for example, of algorithms and bias, that before we even know it, something's happened inside of us, and we're actually just reacting to that. So we come out of alignment with ourselves. And because, let me put it this way. For example, your phone, your iPhone, your Android phone, whatever phone you have, you update the operating system, especially on an iPhone, the iOS, we're constantly updating. You wouldn't dream of using a 2025, 2026 cell phone, with like a 2020 operating system. It just wouldn't work right. So we are constantly updating the operating system on our phones. When was the last time you updated your own operating system? And whenever I ask this question, people go, oh, they don't even think about it. Or the other answer I get is, oh, I'm due. Because
Right.
you can't live today's life as you today
Right.
with, yesterday's programming,
Mm.
and we
Mm.
don't update.
Love
So
it.
this nervous system repatterning and this, I think what's so important, and especially in a world on fire, is that we come back into alignment with ourselves and reintegrate as well. So the recalibration and then the reintegration. We need to form into the whole human that we are. And when we can then come online, come into this conscious awareness, then the tail is not wagging the dog anymore. This powerful feat of engineering that we have that can control us and push us through algorithms, for example. There is the witness, as it were. There is the another self in that sees what we could be doing if we take a moment, just a beat, just a pause, and stay awake behind the wheel of this vehicle, and then choose, am I going to take this path or am I going to take that one? How do I best get to the goal that I truly want?
Beautiful. Roshanak, wow. What a gift to have you here and your brilliance. And as David says, you're really a neuroscientific renaissance. It's fantastic to have you here. We will share in our show notes all of the links. And if you have a program that you want to invite our listeners to, please share that as well. We thank you so much. We know would love to have you on again sometime in the future. And, just thank you for your time.
Namaste. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
Miraculix is a small and independent company that has created the first quantifiable home test called Q-Test for anyone taking mushrooms or psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, and any other psychoactive substance. So think about this. You're at home, you're with friends, you're hanging out, and you're experimenting with these amazing psychoactive plant medicines, and yet you don't really know the dosage. Miraculous is here to help you really have a positive experience so that you don't overdose. Created by Dr. Felix Bell of Germany. Please go on our show notes and order this package. They're now available in the USA, and we couldn't be more excited to represent this home kit because we want you to have a truly positive experience with psychoactives to explore your own reality and the way these psychoactives can help you in your life.
Exploring Reality Maybe is written, produced, fact-checked, and edited by Jody R. Weiss and David Schwartz. Research support is provided by Semicolon Connects. Music produced by Nextbox. Visit our website at exploringrealitymaybe.org to find show notes, transcripts, bios, and to learn more. If you like the show, please visit our website to donate.